here with my colleague and attorney, Steve Boyd. And we also stand with members of our team and our legal team, some courageous survivors, and particularly stand with one courageous survivor here today who has not only found his voice, but chosen to take some very powerful and courageous action. And his name is James Bottley. And James will be speaking in a moment, but part of the reason we stand among our colleagues, survivors and survivor advocates, and James, is that there is truth that needs to be told and facts that need to be revealed. And James's name has not been revealed before today, but he has made a conscious choice with the guidance of Steve and others to have more known about what was done and the circumstances of it, and how it is the diocese, the bishop's payout plan, attempted to quiet him and ask him to receive money to basically go away and not have the story told. James has made the decision to have more known and more told for two reasons. One is he wants other survivors to know they can come forward and they don't have to use their name like he is today. And two, he wants the diocese, the Catholic diocese, and the bishop in the Diocese of Buffalo and those around here to come clean. And so more needs to be known. So we're grateful to you, James, and to you, Steve Boyd, for allowing us and our team to join you in this journey. And with that, let's turn it over to you, Steve Boyd, and tell us what we need to know.
Thank you. Before we get further, I just want to make sure you know who's up here. Mike Rack and Trusha Goff and Stacy Benson are some of the people that locally have made a name for themselves, because through the IRCP process, they've worked, they're part of the Anderson team. They've been working diligently here in Buffalo, and they've made quite a name for themselves with the success they've had and with the kindness and the compassion that they've shown for a number of Western New York survivors. We have two survivors with us. Gary Astridge is with us, and Ann Foster. We are working together on all of our Western New York cases with the Anderson team, and we're grateful that Gary and Ann were able to come up today. We also have Siobhan O'Connor, whose heroic actions led to really cracking open this case, cracking open what happened here in Buffalo and Western New York over the years, when she heroically brought out several documents, secret documents from the diocese that allowed us to know the truth. James Bottlinger's story is well documented. It's been documented several times, but without his name. James was abused by Father Michael Freeman, and this is James and Father Freeman back in the 80s. James asked us to forgive the powder blue tie, right? Yeah. James came to us to tell his story. We worked very hard to tell the depths of the story. And James appeared during the IRCP process before the judges. He told his story, but no one was there from the diocese. And the judges awarded him $650,000. And James rejected that offer. When the Child Victims Act passed, James decided to reject that offer. So his story is well documented, but what has not been stated publicly, we knew the first time his story came out that somebody else had gone to the diocese and said that you've got to do something about Father Freeman. He's an abuser. He abused me. Paul Barr went to the diocese to say that. After James was awarded and rejected the $650,000, we found out that two more people went to the diocese and had face-to-face meetings with the chancellor of the diocese, Donald Troutman. Bishop Troutman is now the Bishop of Erie, Pennsylvania. Bishop Troutman knew that Paul Barr had complained, that two others had complained, and each time there was a complaint, they just moved Father Freeman around until he ended up at St. Mary's in Lancaster. And that's where he met James. And James actually met Bishop Troutman in Lancaster, in Father Freeman's private quarters. And Bishop Troutman did nothing about it. He knows there's been at least 3 complaints against this priest. He sees a boy in the priest's private quarters, and he thinks nothing of it, and he does nothing about it. So James has been a John Doe until today, but he has made the courageous decision and taken the courageous step to come forward today. And I'd like to introduce you to him, and so he could say a few words. James. I'd like you to just talk about, James, that why you're coming forward and why it is you're willing to use your name as we head into the age where a lawsuit will be filed on your behalf.
Well, thank you for coming. Sorry for dragging you all down here. I'd like to blame this on Jay Tokaz if he's here. I was going to take this to the grave. I had no intention of ever speaking about this until that newspaper article came out. I was laying in bed and my sister sent me a text with a picture just so I could be prepared for the newspaper articles. So after nearly having a heart attack, I contacted the diocese and asked if I qualified for that compensation program. I didn't hear back. I was pretty sure I qualified, but it would have been nice to hear back from the church about something, but I didn't. So I contacted an attorney through some friends' references, Mr. Boyd. Was still going to take this to the grave, but he convinced me to go ahead and tell my story. The story that I would tell would really destroy my life as I know it. I would lose a lot of friends, a lot of acquaintances. This would be a permanent record. My children will hear about this when they grow up. My workplace is going to hear about this. I work for the military. I'm not in the military, but I work for the military on a base. It's going to go to the base. It's a pretty closed kind of society. I'm going to hear about this for years. But as I talked with my family about this, we decided that it was the right thing to do to protect future victims and more or less to make the Catholic Church be more transparent. So with that, we started the process of meeting with the compensation program, which was really odd. I really respect Judge Howe and Judge Gorski. They were very nice, very professional, very caring. They listened, but there was no church representative there. There was no question to answer. It was just me telling a small snippet of my experience, and then later getting an offer for the $650,000. So that really didn't feel right to me. I discussed it with my family, and we decided that's really not the right thing to do, to just take money and go away, because the church is still just not being transparent. I wanted treatment records, I wanted communications, I want to know why they let Father Mike after complaints before he knew me, and then I made complaints, but they still moved him, and then there were more victims. So they never answered any of that. So I think the only alternative we have is to go to a trial. Maybe then they can answer, what happened. So,
James, let me ask you, because as you share part of your story with us, you've already mentioned, and it's already been revealed, that Freeman is a serial offender and violated you for many years. That's not new. What is been now revealed here today by you, and you made the choice to use your name here today, did you not?
Yes.
And you also knew that you could have chosen, as most of the survivors with whom we work across the country and here, could have been a Jane Doe or a John Doe in your case. But you chose, in fact, to stand today and give your name and use your name. And why did you make that choice to use your name when you didn't have to, and most don't?
well, I just want the other victims to know, I know how hard it is to come out and tell these kinds of stories. You will lose, a lot of your, how do I say? You'll lose a lot of acquaintances, but it's the right thing to do. You've got to think about the future, protect these kids. The church is not going to change. They're resisting change. So I think we have to see this through and then make them change.
And James, you also mentioned that through and with the guidance of Steve Boyd, went into the bishop's payout plan, or what they call the IRCP. And in that, they agreed and offered to pay you $650,000, correct?
Yes.
And you chose to reject that and say no to that money, because tell us why it is you felt you need to do that.
Well, I was actually taking some inspiration from Ms. O'Connor, being a whistleblower, possibly losing your career, not taking that money. There needs to be a story behind that money. I don't want the church to just determine, here's some money, go away. I'd really like to let a trial happen, to see how much of the story we can get out, to make the church actually come to the table and admit their wrongdoings.
And that process also basically required you to take the money, but they didn't give you any answers and or reveal anything they knew, both about Freeman the offender or the history that was known by the current bishop or the past bishops, or about Troutman and his complicity in Freeman's abuse, correct? So they really gave you no answers or information, and you needed the truth to be known.
Yes.
Is that why you stand with us today?
Yes, the church purposely covered this up. There were victims before me. They asked me to come to the downtown cathedral to talk to their Monsignor and vicars about this back in the late 80s. So they knew Father Mike had other victims. So I went and told them. That meeting didn't go well. But after telling them that and then going to the meeting, I got no answers. Nothing.
James, when you met Chancellor Troutman in Father Mike's personal quarters, and now that you know he had at least 3 complaints of Father Mike, and he sees a boy in this priest's bedroom, what do you think Troutman should have done at that moment in time?
Well, being a father myself, I would do anything to protect my children. Mr. Troutman, Monsignor Troutman, he knew Father Mike was a pedophile. Seeing me there in his room didn't faze him one bit. He said, "Hello, how are you?" We had a few laughs. He left. I stayed at the rectory. I think they don't take it seriously. I think it didn't bother him at all. So, and he's not the only Monsignor that knew Father Mike was a pedophile and did nothing. So there were multiple.
Should we open it up to questions now?
Can you just talk about that meeting? When did that happen, and was that at a church?
The question is to ask James to talk about the meeting with himself and Chancellor Troutman, and where it was, and just describe what happened in that meeting.
I had free access to the rectory at St. Mary's in my teenage years, as did some other boys. Father Freeman wasn't the only pedophile there. There was also Father Jasinski, who initially groomed me and several other boys. So we were always in the rectory. Monsignor Troutman and other church officials, I don't know who they were. They were there for dinners sometimes, or just visiting. They I remember him coming in. I was in Father Mike's room, sitting on the couch, and Father Monsignor Troutman coming in, and I was introduced, and we sat for a while, and then he went back downstairs and left. So that was, yeah.
And it's hard to ask this, but was he like abusing you when you were in that bedroom when you met?
No, I had been drinking a little bit. I was 15 or 16. But no, he wasn't abusing me when he walked in. That was after.
But it had already started.
Yes, yes.
And James, it's correct that Freeman had for years been repeatedly violating you, originally accessing you as a priest and then becoming a father figure as well.
Yes.
And that had continued for years. And it was during that time that Monsignor Troutman became aware that he was alone with you. That means Freeman was alone with you. Is that correct?
Yes, yes.
And then after the repeated violations of you for years, at the age of 19, you made the decision to actually talk to, for a variety of reasons, to Monsignor Madsen, did you not?
Yes.
And why don't you just relate to us what it is you said to him, and then what, if anything, was done after, at the age of 19, you told Monsignor Madsen what had been done to you?
Yes. Monsignor Madsen was dating a family member. So he had approached me at a family gathering and asked if what was going on with Father Mike. I didn't know that he actually knew him, and I didn't know what Monsignor Madsen's role was in the church. But he asked me, and I said, "Oh, well, of course, everybody knows what's going on with him. It's kind of obvious." So he said, "We'll talk later." I said, "Okay." A couple of weeks later, he wanted me to come down to the cathedral downtown at I think it's the rectory. He invited me to come in. I went up to his room, and he wanted me to sign some statements. I said I didn't really want to put anything in writing. The sexual abuse wasn't happening anymore. I just wanted to make a point that I didn't want Father Mike around kids. He shouldn't be a priest. You have to promise me to get him away from kids. And he agreed to that, but he still wanted me to write some statements. I said, I really don't want to be writing these statements, but I'll write down a little bit, but you have to take action. And then he promised me he would, and that was it.
And so after you made this report and gave the Monsignor Madsen an account of what had been done to you by Freeman, what did they do? And what did the then bishop choose to do or allow Freeman to continue to do?
I was told that he wouldn't be a priest anymore, that he wouldn't contact me again, and the church would take care of it. But Father Mike stayed in contact with me for the next 3 or 4 years, maybe two or 3 years. They didn't really do anything. I just recently learned that after the 3 victims before me and then me, that he went on to Pennsylvania where that grand jury report came out. So there are literally a dozen or so victims, probably more.
So after that report, Freeman was allowed by his bishop to continue in ministry unabated and go into other parishes in Pennsylvania and other states. And you learned that recently.
Yes.
Notwithstanding the promise made you that he'd be out.
Right.
You say that part of the reason you're going public and using your name, and you did not have to, because most survivors don't and shouldn't, and your privacy can and would be protected through this process, both past and future, and under the Child Victims Act. You say that you were inspired by Siobhan O'Connor, the former executive assistant to the Bishop Malone. What is it about her and that causes you to make the decision to be as public as you are today?
Well, going public because it's the right thing to do, but I wouldn't have done the right thing without people like Miss O'Connor and reporters breaking this. Reporters back in the '80s trying to break it and being shunned and disciplined and reprimanded. You know, the church, it's a powerful company. It's an organization. They have the police in their pockets. I've seen it firsthand. It's not easy being a whistleblower for a very powerful and corrupt organization. But if people are going to do this, it's the right thing to do.
It is, and we're grateful to you and Siobhan O'Connor and all the other truth tellers for this. Mike Reck, you're one of the lawyers that stand with us. Would you step forward? Mike Reck, you're one of the lawyers, is a part of our team with Steve Boyd. Siobhan, as you stand with us today, what is it we need to know? You've worked with and brought and shepherded a lot of survivors through the Bishop's Payout Plan in New York before the Child Victims Act came into effect, and now that it's in effect, what should folks know? What should survivors know about this experience that's being shared here today and that whole program?
My name is Mike Reck. I'm an attorney with Jeff Anderson and Associates, and we have represented and continue to represent hundreds of survivors of abuse by clergy in New York and here in Western New York specifically. And what the people of Western New York need to know is that this organization does not and cannot do the right thing of its own volition. This diocese and this bishop only does the right thing when they're forced to do the right thing. And they're forced to do the right thing by brave survivors like James, by brave whistleblowers like Miss O'Connor, who allow the advocates to be able to shine a light on those dark places and bring those secrets to light. I was here when the Anderson report was released in response to Bishop Malone's inaction. When Bishop Malone would not release the identities, the histories, and the whereabouts of known offenders, we released our list, which at the time included 13 individuals, 13 priests who we identified through public records as being accused of abusing minors here in Western New York. In response to that pressure, the bishop then released a list of 42. Well, we now know 42 is a far cry from where we are. I believe the bishop's own list is in excess of 80, and reports have been in excess of 100. The reality is that through actions by James, by Steve Boyd, by Jeff Anderson, we will uncover and disclose the identities of all those who endanger children, and we will be able to seek some accountability and some transparency into what was known by diocesan officials, including Bishop Troutman, and when they knew it.
James, come back up here. And Siobhan, stand there. James, we stand here with you today, and on behalf of myself, our firm, the survivors, and the truth tellers, and in particular, Steve Boyd, with whom we have now teamed up to work with and work for the survivors in this area. We just want to express our gratitude to you for your courage, inspired by Siobhan O'Connor and other survivors, and by truth tellers and survivors, that gives us a chance to do what needs to be done, and that is the truth to be revealed. And to be a part of the cleanup instead of allowing the cover-up, which is what they chose to do. Steve Boyd, what more needs to be said about this before questions are answered and asked?
I think maybe if there's some more questions out there, we'd like to hear them. I know we have one in the back.
James, can you talk a little bit more about your life today? I know you said that you were on a military base. Could you be a little bit more specific? You know, where you live now, how old you are? Would you care to say what branch of the military?
Sure. accessible on Google Internet.
Right, but
So-
just to confirm.
I'm
The
sure
question
I'll-
was for James to talk about his life today.
My life today, I've been a high school school counselor. So I work for the military. I'm not in the military. People get confused with that. So all the overseas military families, they need to go to American schools on bases. So that's where I'm a guidance counselor. I'm on the largest Air Force base in the Pacific, Kadena Air Base. I'm at the high school. So I'm a school counselor. I'm 50, gray, balding. The rest of my life, married, 2 kids, young family. Anything else?
Other questions?
You mentioned before about the law enforcement that you've seen it firsthand. Wasn't he like a police chaplain and he used?
Well, Father Mike was a chaplain, but there's also, you know, I've seen it firsthand. You know, there was another article about Martin Harrington. It was in the Buffalo News. I'm not sure who wrote it, about the Buffalo police and the church. You know, there was a code of silence. I saw that firsthand. I've met Mr. Harrington back in the 80s. I met his partners. The police, they knew, absolutely. But back then, that's the way it was done.
By going to trial, what specifically would you like to see come from such a proceeding? What specific information or documents or anything like that?
The question is, what would you like to see by going to trial? What specific information and documents? I'm not sure.
By going to trial, the documents, you know, I'll leave that to the attorneys. I want full transparency from the church. Like, I think the treatment plans, the therapist plans. I met with Father Mike and his therapist at their request. That didn't go well. Those records. What I'd like to get from a trial, I'm not expecting a lot of money. I know there's this money figure out there, the $650,000. That's insignificant to me. I'll let a jury decide what the appropriate money amount is. It could be more, it could be less. I'm going to guess the church is going to offer me a pizza, but we'll let a jury decide.
You were a child back then, just as an adult now, when you look at this and you look at, you know, Bishop Troutman, you know, how does it make you feel that these adults knew about this and didn't really do anything to stop it when you were young?
The question is, how does James feel now as an adult, knowing that adults knew about this when you were a child?
Yeah, well, you know, being a high school counselor, I see this daily in my office. I've had to, you know, work with police on pedophiles and security forces and things like that. You know, the 70s and 80s were a different generation. You know, the latchkey kids, kids were not seen nor heard. So a lot of parents just, you know, come back home when the lights are on. Today's parents, for the most part, you know, they verify where their kids are. They know where their kids are. They know there's monsters out there. They don't give a lot of leeway, thankfully. And a lot of kids that I see in my office, those are the parents that aren't really doing that so much. So as a father now and as a professional now, they're just 2 different eras. I hope that wouldn't happen today.
James, what can you say about Donald Trump personally? Your personal feelings, your emotions after all these years to what he did not do?
The question is your personal feelings about Donald Troutman.
Oh, Troutman. Sorry, I heard Trump. Monsignor Troutman, I would just like to know his records. Like, what did you know when? What was the objective? Why didn't you do anything? He's got a lot of answering to do. You know, I'm not the only person that's happened to, and I'm not the only witness. So they've really got to be transparent on this.
And there is a lot of answering to do by the top officials of the diocese not just here, but in all the cases that now can be brought under the Child Victims Act that could not have been brought before. And what survivors need to know is that it is a time for answers, and it is a time for truth, and it is time for the cleanup of the Catholic Diocese in this area. And it's also important to emphasize that survivors can come forward and remain strictly confidential and private and have their names not known. And that James's choice to have his name out there today was because he wanted this story told by him, the same way Siobhan O'Connor spoke up. And survivors need to know that privacy can be protected, but the offenders like Freeman and those complicit in it like Troutman and the bishops can be exposed and revealed for the past, so the future is safer. So to all the survivors who stand with us and come forward now under the Child Victims Act and share their secrets, we are grateful, and particularly today to you, James, for your courage and your need to have this painful truth known and revealed. So thank you, sir.
Thank you. I want to take one more question from Jay.
This is just a clarification. Did I hear correctly that Freeman had a therapist, that you had met him or her?
The question is a clarification about Father Freeman's therapist, and you had mentioned that you had met with him and the therapist. If you could just expound on that.
Yeah, I think at 90, 91, I've still been in contact with Father Freeman. He had the saying that, we would die on a cross for each other. That was one of his brainwashing tactics. So he wanted me to meet with his therapist. He was desperate to stay in the priesthood, just begging, just meet with therapists, asking me not to talk about the abuse, but just sing his praises. So I went along, I met with a therapist, and that didn't go well. I didn't even get halfway through my briefing when they had to cut it off. But then again, that's a diocese therapist sponsored by the diocese. I think everybody should see those records, and records just like that they just won't be transparent with.
Do you know if this was therapy for his abuse issues, or were they for alcoholism? What?
The question is, do you know what the therapy was for? Was it for his abuse issues?
I was led to believe that he was trying to remain in the priesthood and the active ministry, and I was the only one holding him back. So he needed some good pointers from me with his therapist. He said he would deny, until his grave. So he wanted me to help him stay in the priesthood. And that wasn't my goal.
And that just underscores the amount of control and power he had over you and continue to have for so many years. Thank you, James. Anything further, Stephen?
I think we'll say.
Just I'm sorry, clarify, you said the therapy didn't go well.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Father Mike got pretty agitated in the therapy. He didn't like the questions that I was asking, not making him look good, ruining his career. But then again, that wasn't my goal to keep him in the priesthood. I wanted him out of the priesthood, but the church refused to remove him.
And you continue.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Let's do it.